It was a warm July evening in 2022, the kind of summer night that seemed tailor-made for laughter and celebration. The Walker residence, nestled in the scenic hills of Asheville, North Carolina, was alive with the hum of family chatter and the distant giggles of children playing in the backyard. Strings of fairy lights twinkled across the porch, casting a golden glow over the gathering. For everyone present, it was an evening of joy and tradition, the annual family reunion they all cherished. Everyone, that is, except for David Walker. David, the ever-composed and successful manager of a tech company, stood at the edge of the gathering, a whiskey glass in hand, watching the scene unfold. On the surface, he appeared to be the devoted husband and father, blending effortlessly into the familial bliss. But beneath his calm exterior simmered a storm of emotions, betrayal, anger, and a cold, calculated determination. Tonight was not a celebration for David, tonight was the night he would execute his plan. In the center of the crowd, Alice Walker, his wife of 15 years, was radiant. Her long, honey-blonde hair framed a face glowing with happiness, or so it seemed. Clad in a flowing summer dress that accentuated her athletic frame, she flitted from guest to guest, ensuring everyone felt at home. Her laughter rang out melodically as she shared jokes and memories, her smile warm and inviting. But David saw through it. To him, that smile was a mask, one that hid the web of lies she had been spinning for months. Alice, of course, had no idea what was coming. She believed tonight was like every other reunion, a time to celebrate family, toast to their years together, and reconnect with loved ones. She couldn't see the shadows in David's eyes, the way his jaw tightened every time she looked his way. Nor did she notice the small flash drive he kept tucked discreetly in his pocket, the contents of which could shatter the life they had built. David's mind raced as he surveyed the scene. The image of his wife laughing so freely sent a jolt of rage through him, but he reined it in. Control. That was what tonight demanded. Months of preparation had led to this moment. He had meticulously pieced together evidence, uncovering the depths of Alice's betrayal. Every damning message, every stolen glance, every rendezvous with Jason Carter, a 30-year-old personal trainer at the local gym, had been documented and assembled into a narrative no one could deny. He sipped his drink, the burn of whiskey grounding him. He thought of the nights he'd spent editing the video, watching the pieces fall into place. At first, it had been like ripping open a wound, reliving the pain of discovering her infidelity. But as the days turned into weeks, that pain had transformed into something sharper, a sense of purpose. Tonight, Alice would feel the humiliation he had endured. She would finally see the full weight of her actions. The sound of a toast being called snapped David out of his thoughts. He looked up to see Alice standing at the head of the table, raising her glass with a smile that made his stomach churn. The crowd fell silent, their attention fixed on her. David took a deep breath, steadying himself. His time to speak was approaching, and with it, the moment that would change everything. The stage was set, the audience unwittingly in place. Tonight, the truth would come out, and Alice's world would never be the same. And as the laughter and chatter resumed, David smiled, a small, cold curve of his lips. The storm was about to break. The cracks in David and Alice Walker's marriage didn't form overnight. Like an unsteady foundation, the fault lines had been there for years, widening slowly, almost imperceptibly, until one day they couldn't be ignored. Their love story, once a portrait of passion and partnership, had faded into something routine and distant, a hollow shell of what it used to be. It started in early 2020, during the height of the pandemic. With the world in chaos, David threw himself into his work at the tech company. His job provided him with the structure he thrived on, an escape from the uncertainty outside. The long hours spent on Zoom calls, solving crises, and meeting deadlines meant he was rarely present, even when he was home. What little time he had left was spent decompressing in silence, his energy drained. Alice, on the other hand, found herself stuck in a different kind of monotony. Her days revolved around homeschooling their 2 kids, cleaning the house, and maintaining a semblance of normalcy amidst the chaos. Where David found solace in his work, Alice felt increasingly isolated. Her conversations with David became short and transactional, a grocery list here, a scheduling conflict there. The warmth and connection they once shared had been replaced by silence. She tried to tell herself it was temporary. When the pandemic ends, she thought, things will go back to normal. But the end never came. Even as restrictions lifted, David's priorities remained the same. Work consumed him, leaving Alice to navigate her days alone. The ache of feeling unseen, unappreciated, and unloved began to take root. By mid-2021, Alice had reached a breaking point. Desperate for something, anything, that made her feel alive again, she signed up for a membership at Elite Fit Studio, a high-end gym in Asheville. It started as a way to reclaim her health, but it quickly became more than that. It became her escape. It was there that she met Jason Carter, a 30-year-old personal trainer with an easy smile and a way of making people feel special. Jason was the opposite of David in every way, spontaneous, playful, and attentive. He noticed Alice in a way she hadn't been noticed in years. His compliments, at first harmless, grew bolder. "You're stronger than you think," he would say during a session. "You deserve to be happy." For Alice, those words were a lifeline. She began to confide in Jason, sharing her frustrations about her marriage and her struggles to find herself again. Jason listened, his gaze never leaving hers, offering her the attention and validation she craved. Their sessions extended beyond the gym floor. Coffee after workouts turned into long conversations in Jason's car. Before Alice realized it, their connection had crossed a line. At first, the affair felt like a thrilling escape. It was a world apart from the stifling routines of her daily life, a secret she held close to her chest. Jason made her feel alive, vibrant, and desired in ways she hadn't felt in years. But as the weeks turned into months, the weight of her actions began to bear down on her. Guilt settled in like an unwelcome guest, whispering in the quiet moments between her smiles and laughter. Meanwhile, David remained oblivious. Absorbed in his work, he dismissed the subtle changes in Alice's behavior, the way she guarded her phone, the increased time spent at the gym, the spark in her eyes that hadn't been there for years. On the rare occasions when he noticed something off, he pushed the thought away. Alice was his wife, the mother of his children. The idea of her betraying him was inconceivable. But cracks have a way of becoming chasms. By early 2022, David could no longer ignore the signs. Alice's gym sessions stretched late into the evening. Her phone, once left casually on the kitchen counter, was now always within arm's reach. And though their interactions were still polite, there was a distance between them that hadn't been there before, a silence that spoke louder than words. David tried to convince himself it was nothing, but the nagging feeling persisted. A part of him wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but another part was terrified of what he might uncover. So, he did what he always did, buried himself in work, pretending everything was fine. Alice, too, was trapped. She loved her family, her children, her home, the life she had built with David, but she couldn't tear herself away from the emotional high Jason gave her. Each day, she walked a fine line between the life she knew and the life she craved, unaware that her secrets were beginning to unravel. The stage was set, though neither of them knew it. David, with his growing suspicions, and Alice, with her dangerous double life, were hurtling toward a moment that would change everything. What started as a few cracks in their foundation was about to become an earthquake. It was a quiet evening in April 2022, the kind of night that felt deceptively peaceful. The house was still except for the occasional creak of floorboards and the faint hum of a distant car passing by. David Walker sat at the kitchen table, nursing his second cup of coffee for the evening. His laptop glowed softly in front of him, the cursor blinking on an unfinished work email. But David wasn't typing. His thoughts had wandered far from the spreadsheets and deadlines that usually consumed him. Alice had gone to bed early, something she'd been doing more often lately. "I'm just exhausted," she'd said as she kissed him on the cheek and disappeared upstairs with her phone clutched tightly in her hand. David had watched her go, the knot in his stomach tightening. For weeks now, that phone had become an almost permanent extension of her hand. She guarded it like a secret, carrying it everywhere, even to the bathroom. It was a small detail, but one that David couldn't ignore. Tonight, however, Alice had slipped. In her rush to retreat to the bedroom, she'd left her phone behind, forgotten on the kitchen counter. David's gaze drifted to it, sitting there innocently next to the fruit bowl. His heart began to pound, the kind of pounding that drowns out reason and floods the mind with dread. For weeks, he'd told himself he was imagining things. The long gym sessions, the furtive glances at her phone, the sudden bursts of happiness followed by waves of distance, all of it could have had innocent explanations. Alice was his wife, the mother of his children, the woman he'd built his life with. She wouldn't betray him. She couldn't. But now, as the phone sat there, glowing faintly with a notification, that denial began to crumble. His hands trembled as he reached for it. "Don't do this," a voice in his head warned. "You might not like what you find." But another voice, colder, sharper, urged him forward. "You already know, don't you? You just need proof." He unlocked the phone, his fingers moving almost mechanically. She'd changed her passcode recently, but it hadn't taken much for him to figure it out. Alice was predictable that way. The phone opened to a stream of messages, and his chest tightened as he saw the name at the top of the screen, Jason Carter. The first message was innocuous enough, a joke about her last workout session, but as David scrolled further, the tone changed. The messages became more personal, more intimate. Jason complimented her beauty, her strength, her radiance, as he put it. Alice responded in kind, her words brimming with affection, even longing. And then came the pictures. David stopped scrolling, his hand gripping the edge of the table as he stared at the images. They were undeniable. The dam broke. Every suspicion, every fleeting doubt that he had tried to suppress came crashing down on him all at once. His breath grew shallow, his hands shaking as he continued to scroll through the evidence. The texts, the pictures, the timestamps, all of it painted a vivid, gut-wrenching picture of Alice's betrayal. David's mind raced as he sat there in the dimly lit kitchen. Memories of their life together flashed before him, their wedding day in 2007, the birth of their 2 children, the countless nights spent planning a future together. It was all a lie now, tainted by the weight of her deceit. But as the initial wave of pain subsided, something darker took its place. Anger. Cold, controlled anger. He wanted to march upstairs, wake her, and demand an explanation. He wanted her to see the devastation she had caused. But he stopped himself. That wasn't enough. Confronting her now would be impulsive, emotional. No, David wanted her to feel the same humiliation, the same betrayal that he now felt. And for that, he needed a plan. He locked the phone and placed it back on the counter exactly as he had found it. Then, he rose from the table, his movements deliberate and calm. His mind was already racing with possibilities, piecing together the first steps of what would become a meticulous strategy. If Alice thought her secret was safe, she was wrong. As he climbed the stairs to their bedroom, the storm inside him began to take shape. The man who would lay down beside his wife that night was not the same man who had kissed her goodbye earlier. Something had shifted. David was no longer the devoted husband willing to ignore the signs. He was now a man on a mission, and he would stop at nothing to expose the truth. Lying next to her in the darkness, David listened to the steady rhythm of her breathing. She was oblivious, unguarded. The very thought made his anger simmer even more. "Sleep well, Alice," he thought, staring into the void of the ceiling. "You'll need your strength for what's coming." The battle lines had been drawn, and David had just crossed the point of no return. David Walker had always prided himself on his ability to remain composed under pressure. It was this calm precision that had driven his career success and earned him respect from peers and subordinates alike. But now, that same meticulous nature was being repurposed for something far darker: revenge. After the night of his discovery, David's demeanor shifted, but not in a way anyone else would notice. To Alice, he remained the same distant but dutiful husband. To his children, he was still the hard-working father who occasionally missed dinner due to long hours at the office. But inside, David's mind was a battlefield of strategies and calculations. Every word he spoke, every action he took, was part of a carefully orchestrated plan. His first step was to gather more evidence. The texts and pictures he'd found on Alice's phone were damning, but David wanted to ensure there was no room for denial or manipulation. If he was going to expose her, he would do it with an airtight case. A few discreet online searches led him to Harrington Investigations, a private detective agency based in Asheville. The investigator he hired, Thomas Greer, was a no-nonsense professional who asked few questions and promised results. Greer worked quickly. Over the next few weeks, he followed Alice on her gym days, documenting every detail. It wasn't difficult, her routine was predictable. She would leave the house in her workout clothes, head to Elite Fit Studio, and spend a suspiciously long time there before driving to a small motel on the outskirts of town, Blue Ridge Inn. There, she would meet Jason Carter. Greer provided David with time-stamped photos and video footage of their clandestine meetings, proof that was impossible to refute. While Greer worked in the background, David took a more personal approach. He began monitoring Alice's phone more closely, using a tracking app he installed without her knowledge. The app gave him access to her messages, emails, and even her location in real time. Every notification that popped up on her screen felt like another nail in the coffin of their marriage. The more he uncovered, the colder his anger became. By mid-May, David had everything he needed: text logs, explicit photos, surveillance footage, and even receipts from the motel. But his plan wasn't just about collecting evidence, it was about creating a moment. A moment that would strip Alice of the facade she'd built and force her to confront the consequences of her betrayal. Late at night, in the quiet solitude of his home office, David began piecing together the centerpiece of his plan: a video. Using editing software he'd learned during his early years in tech, he meticulously crafted a timeline of Alice's affair. He started with text messages, overlaying screenshots with haunting background music that emphasized the gravity of her actions. Next came the photos: stolen kisses in the motel parking lot, intimate embraces in Jason's car. Finally, he included clips from the surveillance footage, each one more damning than the last. The process was both painful and cathartic. Watching the pieces of Alice's double life come together was like reliving the moment of discovery over and over again. But it also fueled his resolve. This wasn't just about exposing her to the family, it was about making her feel the humiliation she had inflicted upon him. As the video took shape, David expanded his scope. He created anonymous accounts on various social media platforms, preparing for the possibility of releasing the footage publicly. It wasn't enough for Alice to face the judgment of their family, David wanted her shame to follow her wherever she went. He knew it was cruel, but in his mind, it was justice. Meanwhile, Alice remained blissfully unaware. She went about her days with the same routine, occasionally sending David polite but distant texts about dinner plans or the kids' schedules. If she noticed his growing silence, she didn't show it. David, ever the actor, played his role perfectly, never letting his mask slip. By early June, the video was complete. David saved it to multiple flash drives and encrypted cloud accounts, ensuring it couldn't be lost or tampered with. But the video was only part of the plan. The grand reveal would take place at the upcoming family reunion, a yearly tradition where the Walker family gathered to celebrate love, unity, and shared memories. This year, however, would be different. This year, it would mark the end of Alice's charade. David spent the week leading up to the reunion rehearsing his speech. It would start like any other anniversary toast, warm, nostalgic, full of heartfelt words about their marriage. But then, like a knife twisting in the dark, it would turn. The video would play, and the truth would unravel before everyone's eyes. As the day approached, David felt a strange sense of calm. The rage that had consumed him in the early days of his discovery had been replaced by a cold clarity. He wasn't acting out of impulse or emotion anymore, this was a deliberate, calculated act of retribution. The family reunion would be the perfect stage. Alice had always thrived in the spotlight, but this time, the lights would expose her for who she truly was. And as David prepared for what was to come, he found himself almost looking forward to it. The pieces were in place, and the countdown had begun. Alice had no idea what awaited her. But David knew. And he was ready. The evening sun cast a golden glow over the Walker family backyard as the annual reunion reached its peak. Laughter and chatter echoed across the lawn, mingling with the scent of barbecue wafting from the grill. Children darted between tables, their carefree giggles a sharp contrast to the tension simmering beneath the surface. To everyone gathered, this was another joyous celebration of love and family. But for David Walker, it was the culmination of weeks of meticulous planning. The stage was set, and the moment of truth was near. Alice Walker was radiant, effortlessly playing the role of the perfect hostess. Her summer dress flowed gracefully as she moved between groups of relatives, laughing at jokes, sharing stories, and ensuring everyone felt welcome. She wore the mask well, too well, David thought, as he observed her from across the yard. Her smile, once a source of comfort, now felt like a mockery, a reminder of the lies she had woven. Tonight, that mask would shatter. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, David made his move. He stepped onto the patio, a glass of whiskey in hand, and raised it slightly to catch everyone's attention. The conversation died down, and all eyes turned to him. Alice, standing near her sister, flashed him a warm smile, oblivious to the storm about to descend. "Everyone," David began, his voice steady and measured, "thank you for being here tonight. This reunion has always been a special tradition for us, a chance to celebrate the bonds that keep us together. And this year, it's particularly meaningful as Alice and I mark 15 years of marriage." Applause broke out, accompanied by a few cheers. Alice's cheeks flushed as she glanced around the crowd, clearly moved by the gesture. She looked at David, her eyes shining with what she believed was affection. But David didn't meet her gaze. Instead, he continued, his tone taking on an edge so subtle that only a few noticed. 15 years, he repeated, a faint smile playing on his lips. It's a long time, filled with ups and downs, triumphs and challenges. And through it all, I've always believed that honesty and trust were the foundation of a strong marriage. Alice's smile faltered slightly, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. She opened her mouth to speak, but David raised a hand, silencing her gently but firmly. "I've prepared something special to commemorate this milestone," he said, pulling a small remote from his pocket. "A look back at the journey we've shared." The large TV screen mounted on the patio flickered to life. At first, the screen was black, and the crowd leaned forward expectantly. Alice's sister clapped her hands together, murmuring, "Oh, how sweet." But the sweetness lasted only seconds. The first image appeared, a text message exchange between Alice and Jason, their names displayed prominently. It started innocently enough, a simple, playful message. But as the screen transitioned to more texts, the tone shifted. The messages became intimate, explicit, unmistakable. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the words played out before their eyes, each one a dagger aimed at Alice's carefully constructed image. Alice froze, her face draining of color. "David," she whispered, her voice barely audible. But he didn't respond. His expression remained unreadable as the video continued. The texts gave way to photos, Alice and Jason standing close in the gym parking lot, their heads tilted together in shared laughter. Then came the footage. Grainy but clear, it showed Alice entering a room at the Blue Ridge Inn, Jason following close behind. The timestamps left no room for misinterpretation. The crowd erupted into murmurs and whispers, some too stunned to speak. Alice's father, seated near the back, rose to his feet, his expression a mixture of shock and anger. Alice's sister placed a trembling hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. As for Alice, she seemed paralyzed, her hands gripping the edge of the table as if it might anchor her to reality. "David, please," she begged, her voice cracking. "This isn't." "Stop," David interrupted, his voice colder than anyone had ever heard it. "Not here. Not now. You've had your chance to speak. This is mine." The final clip played, a slow montage of Alice's texts layered over footage of her and Jason at the gym, set to hauntingly quiet music. When the screen finally went dark, the silence that followed was deafening. It was the kind of silence that crushed everything beneath it, leaving no space for excuses or explanations. David stepped forward, his gaze locking onto Alice's. 15 years, he said, his voice trembling slightly, not with emotion but with the weight of restraint. "That's how long I've dedicated to this marriage. To you. To us. And this is how you repay me?" Alice couldn't respond. Tears streamed down her face as she shook her head, her lips moving soundlessly. The family looked on, too shocked to intervene. No one dared to speak, no one dared to defend her. The evidence had been too damning, too explicit. David placed the remote on the table, his movements deliberate. "I wanted everyone to see the truth," he said, his voice steady once more. "Because I'm done pretending. I'm done lying to myself. This marriage is over." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Alice standing alone in the crushing weight of her humiliation. The whispers grew louder as he disappeared into the house, but he didn't stop. He didn't look back. For David, the moment was over. Justice had been served. But as he closed the door behind him, a strange emptiness settled in his chest. The satisfaction he'd anticipated felt hollow, fleeting. He had won, yes, but at what cost? The Walker family reunion had disbanded in record time. Guests had filed out with murmured excuses, awkward handshakes, and fleeting glances that spoke volumes. What had started as a night of celebration had descended into chaos, leaving behind the wreckage of a marriage exposed and a family forever changed. Alice Walker sat alone in the living room, still in the dress she had worn to host the gathering. The bright floral pattern now felt like a cruel joke against the bleakness of her reality. Her hands trembled as she clutched a crumpled napkin, futilely dabbing at her tear-streaked face. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, notifications piling up from family members and friends who had been present, or who had already seen the video online. She couldn't bring herself to look at it. David had retreated to the upstairs office, the door firmly shut. Alice knew better than to try and follow him. She had seen the look in his eyes as he delivered his parting words, the finality of it, the cold distance that left no room for discussion. He was done with her. And deep down, Alice couldn't blame him. The silence in the house was deafening. It pressed against her chest, heavy and suffocating. Her mind raced with fragmented thoughts. How had it come to this? Was there any way to salvage what was left? But no matter how she spun it, the answer was the same. There was nothing left to salvage. The life she had built, the family she had cherished, was now in ruins, and it was her fault. He had expected to feel satisfaction, a sense of closure after finally exposing Alice's betrayal. For weeks, he had meticulously planned this moment, driven by the pain and anger that consumed him. And yet, As he replayed the events of the evening in his mind, all he felt was an aching void. The faces of his family members lingered in his thoughts, the shock, the disappointment, the judgment. He had turned their reunion into a spectacle, a public unraveling of his marriage. He couldn't ignore the small voice in the back of his mind asking if it had been worth it. Was this truly justice, or had he simply traded his pain for hers? David leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. The marriage was over, that much was clear. But now that the storm had passed, he was left with the aftermath. 2 children who would wake up tomorrow to a fractured home. A family whose whispers and judgments would echo long after tonight. And a wife who, despite her betrayal, was still the mother of his kids and the woman he had once loved. The hours ticked by as she replayed the affair in her mind. She thought of Jason, his charm, his attention, the way he made her feel alive again. But that illusion had shattered the moment David revealed Jason's other affairs. She wasn't special to him, she was just another conquest. The realization cut deeper than she expected. She had destroyed her marriage, her family, for a man who had only been using her. As dawn approached, Alice wiped her face and reached for her phone. She had to leave. Staying in this house, in this town, felt unbearable. She would pack her things, leave quietly, and figure out her next steps somewhere far away. Maybe, with time, she could rebuild herself, confront her mistakes, and find a way to be better, for her kids, if not for herself. Her suitcase was missing, and the note on the kitchen counter was short and to the point. "I'm sorry for everything. I'll stay away until the divorce is finalized. Please tell the kids I love them." David stared at the note for a long time, his emotions a tangled web of anger, sadness, and relief. He had wanted her gone, and now she was. But instead of feeling triumphant, he felt hollow. The silence in the house was oppressive, a reminder of the void her absence left behind. For Alice, the shame of her actions followed her everywhere. The video David had created had spread far beyond their family, reaching friends, acquaintances, and even strangers. She became the subject of whispers and judgment, a cautionary tale in their tight-knit community. Alone in a small apartment in Charlotte, Alice began to piece her life back together. She attended therapy, wrestled with the choices she had made, and confronted the deeper issues that had led her down this path. For the first time in years, she faced herself without excuses. David, meanwhile, focused on his children and his work, trying to create a semblance of stability for them. But the house felt empty without Alice. At night, he would find himself standing in the doorway of their bedroom, staring at the bed they once shared. The anger that had driven him for so long was gone, replaced by a quiet sadness. He couldn't deny that he missed her, not the woman she had become, but the partner she had once been. For Alice, it was a painful reckoning with her choices and the realization that she had let her own unhappiness drive her to destroy the very things she cared about. For David, it was an uncomfortable truth: his own neglect and emotional distance had created the cracks that Jason exploited. Their marriage had been a two-way street, and while Alice had crossed a line, he couldn't deny his role in the road that led them there. Life went on, but the scars of that night lingered. For both David and Alice, the reunion wasn't just the end of their marriage, it was the beginning of a journey toward understanding, healing, and perhaps, one day, forgiveness. The months that followed the Walker family's implosion were marked by silence, a silence that carried the weight of regret, reflection, and unanswered questions. David and Alice had gone their separate ways, their once shared life now reduced to fragmented routines and fleeting moments of communication, primarily about their children. The house in Asheville, once filled with laughter and memories, had become a hollow shell of its former self. For Alice, starting over felt both liberating and punishing. She had moved to Charlotte, renting a modest apartment far from the familiar streets of Asheville. The distance was intentional. She needed to escape the whispers, the pointed stares, and the shame that had become her constant companions. But no matter how far she ran, the echoes of her choices followed her. She threw herself into therapy, seeking to understand why she had strayed so far from the life she once cherished. It wasn't just about Jason, it never had been. The affair was a symptom, not the cause. Years of feeling invisible, unvalued, and trapped in the monotony of a life that revolved around others had left her vulnerable. Therapy forced her to confront these truths, to stop blaming others for her unhappiness and take responsibility for her actions. Alice also worked to rebuild her relationship with her children, though the process was slow and painful. They visited her on weekends, their questions cutting deeper than any accusation. "Why did you leave, Mom? Don't you love us anymore?" Their young minds couldn't yet grasp the complexities of adult relationships, and Alice struggled to find the right words. She could only hope that time and consistency would heal the rift she had created. Meanwhile, David remained in Asheville, navigating his new life as a single father. His days were consumed with work and parenting, leaving little room for introspection. But in the quiet hours of the night, when the house was still, his thoughts would drift back to Alice. He would replay the moments before their marriage fell apart, wondering where things had gone wrong and whether he could have done more to save it. David knew he wasn't blameless. His obsession with work, his emotional unavailability, and his failure to recognize Alice's growing dissatisfaction had all contributed to the cracks in their foundation. While her betrayal had been the final blow, the groundwork for their collapse had been laid long before Jason entered the picture. Despite this awareness, forgiveness did not come easily. The memory of Alice's affair, immortalized in the video he had created, was a constant reminder of the pain she had caused. And yet, there were moments when he missed her, not the woman who had lied to him, but the partner who had once stood by his side, full of hope and love. Alice, now employed at a small nonprofit in Charlotte, had started to find purpose in helping others. It was a small step, but one that reminded her of her worth beyond the confines of her past mistakes. She no longer defined herself solely by her role as a wife or mother, she was learning to be herself again. David, too, found a sense of stability. His children were his anchor, their resilience a source of inspiration. He had begun to explore therapy himself, not just to process the betrayal but to understand his own patterns and behaviors. Slowly, he was learning to let go of the anger that had consumed him for so long. They spoke only when necessary, their conversations polite but distant. The possibility of reconciliation seemed remote, but neither could completely close the door on it. Life, after all, had a way of surprising even the most resolute hearts. One evening, after dropping the kids off at David's house, Alice hesitated at the door. For a moment, she considered saying something, an apology, a thank you, perhaps even a plea for understanding. But the words caught in her throat. Instead, she gave him a small, tentative smile before walking away. David watched her go, his own emotions a tangle of uncertainty. The chapter of their marriage had ended, but the book of their lives was still being written. What does forgiveness truly mean in the wake of betrayal? Is it possible to rebuild trust, or are some wounds too deep to heal? How much responsibility do both partners bear in the breakdown of a relationship, and what can we learn from their mistakes? We want to hear from you. What do you think about David's actions? Was his revenge justified, or did he take things too far? Do you feel sympathy for Alice, or do you think she deserves the consequences of her choices? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more gripping stories that make us question the complexities of human relationships. Until next time, stay tuned for more tales that linger in the shadows.